My going glasses was not my intention to be there. Alright. Okay. So, last class, oh, are you ready, Mr. Rose?
Mhm.
Okay, last class we talked about, what beef parts, well, the beef parts of a market, of a steer. And so that's gonna lead us right into actually judging the beef cattle. So today we're gonna talk about, how the characteristics that we need to actually judge the beef cattle. So what I'm gonna pass around, is I'm gonna pass around a little Post-it note. And the categories on the board, there's 5 of them. If you all could list them in the order of importance that you think they are, just from 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important, about what we, the characteristics that we judge beef cattle on. Is that clear? Is everybody ready? Okay. All right. So we're going to go into our essential questions, and our first essential question was, what does the ideal beef cow look like? So we learned about the beef parts, and that's going to help us learn how to identify what the most ideal beef cow looks like in this day and age in the current industry. Our lesson objectives are students should be able to identify desirable traits in beef cattle and then understand the 5 main criteria for placing these animals. So we're going to go into our 5 characteristics, and that's going to help us learn how to place beef cattle. So our first one, the most important, was growth in frame or skeletal size. So the ideal beef steer is between 1,250 to 1,400 pounds. And then so once it has been slaughtered and processed, the carcass weight is between 700 to 900 pounds. So market-ready animals that are less than 1,000 pounds cost the producer more per pound to process. So they're actually ineffective for processing. And then if they're more than 1,500 pounds, they're too big for processing. So indicators of the size, that's something you can look for while you're judging the animal, is the length of body at the height of the hip and the length and size of the cannon bone. Does anybody remember where the cannon bone is? No? Alright, the cannon bone is right below the knee, and it's between the knee and the pastern. The next most important characteristic is muscling. So heavily muscled animals produce more meat and less fat. So consumers obviously prefer more beef with less fat. That's why when you go to eat a steak, generally you're going to trim off all the fat. You're not going to want to eat it. So indication of fat is muscling. So muscling is visible in the round and the width of the stamp and over an animal's back. Well-muscled animals should have a round shape at the top, and it should not be flat. So what you're going to see when we judge classes. So volume and performance is the next most important. Volume or capacity indicates how well the animal should perform. Animals should be deep-bodied, that consume a large amount of feed in a short amount of time. So they can reach the market weight faster. Indicators of capacity and performance are rib cage length, depth and shape of the spring, and the depth of leg and width of chest bore. So the second to last indicator is condition and trimness. So the amount of trimness or condition is also referred to as fat. It relates to performance. So depending on the type of animal you have, in this case we're talking about market steer, you want to have an animal that's more heavily muscled. So a certain amount of fat that's required is and it's desirable for it to be well marbled. And the definition for marbling, does anybody want to read that off to me?
Marbling is the small seams of fat in the muscle tissue that's important for taste and tenderness.
Okay. And then indications of this, well, indications of the amount of fat that would be on the animal are found in the brisket, over the ribs, in the ankle, on the pin bone, and on and in the the cod or udder region, depending on the sex of the animal. So the last characteristic, we're actually going to look at some of these, the different characteristics. That way you guys have a visual before I go into the demonstration of actually judging the animals. So strong bone and correct structure is essential for the animals traveling to feed in water. Structure can be observed at the angle of the shoulder, the levelness of the top line and hip, and then as well as the pastern angle is when the animal moves. Balance is the overall attractiveness of an animal. So animals that are easily balanced can be visible from the front into the rear and as they're moving. So before I go into judging, showing you all, demonstrating how to judge the animal, here is some examples of the muscle. Ooh, okay. So here is the thin muscled animal. You can see that it has a very narrow base right up here and also along right below the pasterns. And then so if you have a market animal compared to a breeding, how would you think maybe a market animal would be different from a breeding animal as far as muscling? How do you think those two would differ? Does anybody want to take a guess?
The market animals can have more muscle.
Yes, exactly. A market animal would want more muscling because that way it can produce higher quality beef. So, probably an example for beef cattle, for steer, was somewhere between average and thick muscle, because if we have super thick muscles, the meat is actually very tough. And here's an example of an excess of fat. The fat tends to be over the top line, at the tailhead. In the brisket, a full brisket, we'll see a better shot of that in a little bit. And then a loose underline right here, and then an udder fat. So here's an example of not enough fat. You can obviously see where a place that you would think that it would be clean over the ribs, an empty brisket, an empty cod, and a trim tailhead. So this is the perfect example of the brisket. Here is a full brisket. It indicates a correct amount of finish, and then here is something with not enough finish. So which one do you guys think would be more desirable in the industry? The one with correct finish, exactly. Okay. All right, so then I'm going to go into the actual judging. On your paper, if you all could go ahead and just think about, obviously I haven't explained to you and you haven't been through the actual process, but just go along and where do you think you would place the animal over the characteristics that we talked about. All right, so I'm going to put the correct placing up on the board so that way it's not very confusing when I go to talk about it. So the correct placing would be 3, 4, 1, 2. And when it comes to judging, I find it easiest if you pick the top 2 animals and then you pick the first animal and then pick the bottom animal, and then you can very easily place the 2 animals that were interchangeable. So the top pair of steers, so we placed 3 over 4 because it was more structurally correct and heavily muscled. More specifically, 3 is more heavily muscled steer with a muscle expression down from the top to the lower quadrants. It has a little bit more muscle compared to number 4 over here. When you actually hang it on a rail and you slaughter the animal, you would expect him to hang a heavier carcass with more pounds of edible product compared to number 4. So number 3 has slightly more muscling than number 4. But however, 3 needs to possess a better slope on his rear legs. So back here, a better slope, and more depth in his rib and his flank. So although he's cleaner throughout his neck and brisket, he is structurally incorrect in his rear legs. He's shallower. He needs to possess. Okay, so we're going into our middle steers. So we preferred 4 over number 1 because he best combines structure, balance, and uniformity of muscle to the highest degree. So our hairy-eared steer, number 4, was more correct in his angulation from his stifle. So right up here was his stifle to his hock. And he is cleaner throughout his neck and brisket, but he's structurally incorrect in his rear legs, which is shallower volumes and more ill-balanced from our profile view. And then we placed 1 over 2 because number 1 is a bolder appearance steer. He's deeper in rib and he's a stouter made steer compared to number 1 compared to number 2. We would expect 1 to have a more desirable yield grade. And he would hang a meatier carcass on the rail, so when we go to actually slaughter the animal and we look at his carcass, he would have a lot more higher quality meat. So 2 is longer and trimmer in his neck, but he is also the shallowest made, so he's the narrowest tracking and the lightest muscle steer in his class, which is why he was placed on. Although number 2 placed over number 1, our first steer is the shallowest and the most narrow tracking. And then we're going to go to our second class. And you guys are going to actually go ahead and again rank the animals, but then if you guys can think about a couple reasons why you think that they were placed in that certain order, and then we're going to talk about it. So here is your class. When we get to it. Here we go. So this class placement is 2, 3, 4, 1. Does anybody want to share what they place? Yes, 2, 3, 4, 1. Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? Do you want to tell us why you placed them in there in that order?
Well, I picked 2. I put 2 and 3 were my top 2, so then I had to decide between them. And I think I picked 2 over 3 because the brisket was a little more full. And because their backs kind of look the same, like the bottoms kind of look the same. So that's why I picked 2 over 3. It was really for the brisket. And then 1 seems skinnier than 4, and I picked 4 because I did think maybe fatter before skinnier.
Yes, okay. Well, actually, you were really close. Well, you were exactly spot on for 2 over 3. 2 is a long pattern trimmer conditioned steer, and he's actually a little bit longer and wider in his hip. He's actually softer and more market ready compared to number 3, which is why he was placed over number 3. So number 3 is a little bit more heavily muscled and more correctly finished than the steer above him. And then also, he was placed over number 4 because he's a little bit more boldly ribbed, but the Hereford is actually the heaviest finished, the shortest and complete steer in the class. So then we're going to talk about the last 2. So number 1, the last 2 is they're the lighter muscled steer in the class. So 4 and 1 were the 2 lighter muscled steers in the class, and they have deeper bodied, bold, sprung steer. They have a softer look and it's closer to the markable endpoint. However, number 1 is a longer body, clean design steer, but he's the flattest and narrowest made, and he's the lightest in the class, which is why he was placed last. As you can see, this class compared to the last class, the steer are a lot younger and they're a lot more green, and these steer are a lot more closer to their endpoints. So it's obviously a very big difference between the 2 classes. So then we're just going to go back and review our essential questions and our objectives. So our essential question was, how does the ideal beef cow look like? And so we went over the 5 components of identifying the most ideal beef cow in this industry. Does somebody want to read them off to me really fast? With the 5 ideal conditions for identifying a beef cow.
Sure. Condition and trimness, volume and performance, the soundness, muscling, and then growth and frame or skeletal size.
Does anybody remember the correct order? Yes.
Growth, muscling, performance, condition.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And then our 2 lesson objectives were students should be able to identify desirable traits in beef cow, which Tracy did, and then I just understand the 5 main criteria for placing animals. So next class we're actually going to go into judging lambs, judging market lambs, and then following that we'll go into learning how to judge market swine, because each species is a little bit different, and that will complete our cornerstone topic will be completed when we finally go in and actually do a livestock competition.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if you guys can give